The standard is the standard. That's what Steeler Nation have been told the past 20 years or longer. Well, the standard has turned into winning 8, 9, 10 games, being just 500 or a little above, and getting our asses kicked in the first round of the playoffs. And this is something that isn't even happening since Big Ben's retirement. If you really look back at the Steelers' playoff history since our last Super Bowl appearance versus the Packers, the Steelers have not done well in the playoffs. And the teams that we have beaten, when you look at their situation, it wasn't even that impressive of a win. So what can the Steelers do to bring ourselves back to what we should be as one of the best teams in the NFL? And I think the better question is, what will they do? Because I think a lot of fans are kind of losing faith in this organization of making the hard decisions. Personally, I'm in favor of blowing it up. Trading anyone of value that's not a first or second year player. That even includes guys like Cam Hayward and TJ Watt, who I love. They are the definition of Steelers, but they have value still. Trading someone like Pickens, someone like Minka, anyone that has value that is of an older age, I think we should trade them, load up on draft picks, because we have to get a new franchise quarterback. And the only way to do that is by being a bottom 5-ish team in the league. And we can't do that with this team. But that's all dreams. None of that will happen. Ownership has already been pretty clear that Tomlin's staying, and we're going to keep trying to run it back with most of our team. So I'm going to go over what I think the Steelers realistically should do this offseason to return the Steelers to the true standard. The first thing I want to talk about are possible coaching changes. Again, Tomlin's not going anywhere. They're not going to blow it up. But all because they don't get rid of Tomlin doesn't mean they can't get rid of other coaches. Now, do I think Arthur Smith or Terrell Austin will be fired? No. Should they? Yes. Now, Arthur Smith could leave because he's being interviewed for a few different head coaching jobs as I'm recording this. But I'm going to give out some names that I would love to see as possible replacements if they do get fired, or even guys that I would love to add to the staff to bring some innovation to the team, even if they're just as assistants. Now, I didn't include any current offensive or defensive coordinators because it's less likely that a current coordinator that is getting looked at to be a head coach would leave to still be a coordinator. Like, for example, Ben Johnson. I would love to bring Ben Johnson onto this team. But why would he leave as the OC for the Lions to be the OC for the Steelers? It doesn't make any sense. So all these guys are not current offensive or defensive coordinators. Starting on the offensive side of the ball, I have 3 guys from the 49ers. First name is Mike Lombardi. He's the senior offensive assistant. The next one is Clay Kubiak. He's the offensive passing game specialist. And the third one is Brian Grease, quarterback coach. Now, I'm not going to go super into detail about all of these guys' backgrounds just because I don't want this video to be an hour long. But the reason I like these 3 guys are, one, they're from the Shanahan tree, which obviously has been very successful in the NFL. But all 3 have been very important in developing Brock Purdy from Mr. Irrelevant to a legit starting quarterback. And that'll be very important both in our short term, but also our long term. Because I do think the Steelers will try to draft a quarterback, not this year, but the next year or 2. So we got to have guys who can develop our young quarterback. The next name is Brian Johnson. He is the offensive passing game coordinator with the Washington Commanders. The reason I like bringing in someone who has been working with Cliff Kingsbury is how well they designed an offense for both a young, inexperienced quarterback, but also a very athletic quarterback. Now, I know the odds of the Steelers getting someone of Daniel's skill set and athleticism is unlikely, but that staff got absolutely the most out of Daniels in that offense, which wasn't that talented from a roster standpoint this year. I think bringing in someone who saw what it takes to put their quarterback in the best possible situation would be a great addition to our staff. And lastly, on the offensive side of the ball is Scotty Montgomery. He's the assistant head coach and running back coach with Detroit. He has been connected to one of the best running offensive attacks his entire career. Obviously this year with the Lions, but before that it was the Colts and Jonathan Taylor. And way beyond that too. He knows what it takes to create an explosive and consistent run game, and the Steelers desperately need that. Plus, working under Ben Johnson the past year, I'm sure he's learned plenty about developing a great passing attack and being creative. On the defensive side of the ball, we'll start with three guys with head coaching experience. The first one is very unlikely, but I've heard a few rumors, and that's Marcus Freeman from Notre Dame. Now, I don't think he'll leave Notre Dame for a while, and if he does, I'm sure he'll want to become a head coach right away. But maybe if Tomlin puts it out there that he's considering leaving in a year or two or retiring, they could bring in Freeman as a defensive coordinator, let him mentor under Tomlin, and then learn some ropes before being promoted. So it's almost like a, hey, you're our future head coach. It's an official or unofficial official deal, be our DC for 2 years, and then you have the job automatically. The next are two former head coaches that will leave a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths. And that's Robert Saleh and Matt Eberflus. They had terrible stints as head coaches, but both had great success as defensive coordinators, and I think they can still bring that value to the Steelers. Then the last two guys I have are both from the Vikings. Durante Jones, who is the passing defensive game coordinator / DB coach. And the other guy is Thad Bogardus. He's the assistant linebacking coach. Both of these guys helped bring the Vikings to one of the worst defenses in the entire league to one of the best within like a 2-year span. And the Vikings have kind of been known for having massive plays with their sack totals, their interceptions, forcing fumbles, those big play turnovers that can swing games that the Steelers have struggled with the past 2 years. Now on to the Steelers free agency, where we will reconstruct our roster. Here are the Steelers' current free agents and how much they were making last year. Obviously, we have both quarterbacks. We have both running backs. From the wide receiver core, we have Mike Williams and Van Jefferson. Offensive tackle, Dan Moore. Both of our injured guards from last year, James Daniel and Nate Herberg. Defensive end, Loudermilk. Outside linebacker, Elandon Roberts. And our corners, Cam Sutton and Dante Jackson. I think our no-brainer keepers are Justin Fields, Jalen Warren, and Elandon Roberts, assuming no one goes out and just tries to extremely overpay for them. But I think they should all stay within a reasonable contract price. I'd like to keep James Daniels specifically, but even Herberg, assuming their recovery is progressing well and they're not too expensive. But I will say, I do think Daniels, even with the injury, will be too expensive. And if Loudermilk can stay under $1 million, I don't mind bringing him back for depth. Now the rest of those guys, get him out of here. I will say though, for Najee, I would love to keep him, but I'm assuming his price will be at least $7-8 million per year, and I don't think he's worth it. Now, if he stays at $2 to $3 million, I don't mind it. I do think the players love him, and I think he fits the Steelers well, but I really want us to draft a legit explosive, big play capable running back, and I think Warren has proven he's probably a better running back than Najee. So I don't see why we really keep Najee as a third string running back. I also have three guys I want to cut in order to create more cap space. Our depth edge rusher, Preston Smith, who we traded for, if we cut him, we'd save $13.5 million for cap space, and he barely played for us. So that should be a no-brainer cut. Larry O, our defensive lineman, was so absolutely useless, and we can save $7 million by cutting him, so that should be a no-brainer as well. And lastly, I know it's controversial, but cutting Minka would save about $15.5 million. And I do think a lot of his lack of progression or performance is from the schemes, but I think it's time to move on. He's getting older. He hasn't been playing what he's worth. So I think it's time to move on. So after our cuts and re-signing those players, we should have roughly within $65 to $73 million in cap space, which is a pretty good start. Now we have to sign a big name wide receiver. We have no choice. We cannot go into next season with just George Pickens. Signing T. Higgins would be perfect, but I don't think it's likely. So we need to sign Chris Godwin. I do think that's a possibility. I also would like to look at Darius Slayton or Hollywood Brown to bring into our wide receiver room because we really do have to improve it if we want any chance of winning. PFF thinks Godwin will make around $20 million a year, but let's just bump him up to $25 million per year as a cap hit just to play it a little safer or conservative with who we can bring in. And let's also sign Darius Slayton for an average of $12 million per year. So we've upgraded our wide receiver room significantly, And now we have about $36 million in cap space left. Safety Cameron Bynum from Minnesota would be a perfect replacement for Minkah. He mostly does what we want Minkah to do for the Vikings, being a big play saving tackler and getting picks and making turnovers happen. Plus, remember, in this situation, we might have brought in one or two of the assistants from the Vikings who know how to best implement him in order to do what he does best. We also need to add a corner opposite of JPJ. It is extremely important. I don't think JPJ is a true number one corner. I think he's better off as a number two. And here are some guys that we could bring in. The Vikings corner is also available, but let's not just steal the whole roster. The three guys I would like to look at are the Jets corner DJ Reed, the 49ers guy Tre'Davious Ward, or a vet like Carlton Davis III. All three, or any of the three, would be great additions. After adding those two guys into the secondary, that would be most of our cap space, excluding us being able to restructure some guys, which always happens. But that's what I would do in free agency. Fix the wide receiver room and fix the secondary. To lead us into our draft section, I'm going to discuss a non-draft situation. I think it's very possible the Steelers could try and trade away Pickens. There continues to be problems, and I think the Steelers will try and offload him instead of extending him. Here are some of the previous wide receivers that were big names, still extremely relevant players, that had 1 year left on their contract before being traded. As you can see, for the most part, teams were able to get a first round pick plus more for their star wide receiver. Now, I don't necessarily think Pickens is on the same level as these four guys were, besides maybe Diggs because he was 30 years old when that trade happened. But I am pulling back my expectations a little bit. But if a trade for Pickens is possible, we look to try to trade with one of the top teams who have a late round pick but needs a wide receiver. Maybe the Chiefs, depending how Rashee Rice's injury recovery and legal problems go. Kelsey might retire. You look at the Bills, Amari Cooper might leave. The rest of the wide receiver core is still up in the air. The Commanders could use someone opposite of Terry. The Texans need someone since Stephon Diggs is a free agent and recovering from an injury, and Tank Dell is recovering from an injury. And to be honest, the Packers really need someone, a more go-get-it guy than the guys they have on their team. Could they trade Pickens to one of their teams for a first? Maybe. But I'm going to be a little more realistic, and let's say we get like a second round and a fourth round for him. So instead of doing a full mock draft, I'm going to give more of a guideline of who I think they could take, because I don't want to predict what other teams are going to do as well. So in round one, my main two positions I want them to pursue are either wide receiver and corner. And that's even though they went heavy on those in the free agency, I still think it's worth it. So for wide receiver, there are three guys that are first round talent. Technically will not be available though. But Egbuka or Burden might be. Both I think would be really solid wide receivers alongside Godwin and Darius Slayton, because again, we trade away Pickens, so we could use another guy to add to that room. At corner, we have Benjamin Morrison from Notre Dame. Now, he does have a lot of injury history already in his career, so he does kind of scare me. But there's also Ravel Jr. from East Carolina that could be really good. And if none of those guys are available, I also wouldn't mind going defensive line. Cam Hayward's getting older and he needs replaced soon, and the overall defensive line struggled this year. So Kenneth Grant or Walter Nolan could also be valuable first round picks. In round two, we pretty much have the same positions, but we're also adding running backs. It'll obviously depend who we take in the first round, and that position will probably be crossed off. But some guys I like are corners, Jadaea Barron or Trey Amon, defensive lineman Alfred Collins, wide receivers Trey Harris or Matthew Golden, or running backs Amari Hampton, Caleb Johnson. And then in the third round, again, same positions, just depending on who we drafted before. I also think adding a safety in there could be interesting. So some guys, if Trey Henderson falls back to the third, I could also see him being a second round guy based on how the playoffs are going. Corner Dorian Strong, safety Andrew Mabuka, or defensive lineman Howard Cross the third are all valuable guys. In rounds 4 through 7, we could take an additional corner because, again, we're letting some guys walk in free agency. It was a really thin position on the roster, so I don't mind drafting two corners. One of them in like the first 2 or 3 rounds, one of them in the later rounds. Same goes with defensive linemen. I don't think it's a problem drafting 2 of them. And then we also could use a D-end, some tackle depth, or an additional wide receiver. So here's what the Steelers roster is going to look like next year. Again, I'm not saying this is my preferred method to bringing us back to the standard, but I think this is a combination of realistic and best case scenario. Justin Fields is going to be our starting quarterback. I'm hoping with a full offseason as the number 1 and not having to worry about Russell Wilson behind him and Mike Tomlin favoring Wilson, we can let Fields just ball out. I do think in order for him to really show what he can do, we have to pull off the reins. I don't like the idea of playing super conservative like we've always done. Listen, if he goes out and he bombs, we just get a quarterback in the draft and it works out in the end. But we have to let him loose. We can't baby him. At the running back, we're going to have a combination of Jaylen Warren and one of the rookies. Again, we got Henderson, Hampton, Johnson. There's multiple guys. We just get one of the top 5 or 6 guys outside of Genty, and I'll be happy. At wide receiver, we have Chris Godwin as number 1. At number 2, we brought in Darius Slayton or Hollywood Brown. We also have a new rookie wide receiver like Ibuka, Burden, Golden Harris, one of the following, and also Calvin Austin, who I actually thought had a phenomenal season last year given his role and circumstances. Tight end still Muth, of course. The offensive line is mostly going to be the same. I hope we move Broderick Jones back to left tackle. I'm not saying that'll fix all of his problems. I overall think he's just not very good, but that's more of his natural position. And we have Troy Fatu playing right tackle, which was also his position in college. At left guard, we decided to keep Samalu, who I also think could be a cut candidate, but I think they like having the veteran on there because it's such a young offensive line. At center, we have Frazier, of course, and at right guard, we probably bring back McCormick as the starter, assuming James Daniels walks. For edge rushers, we still have the main 3 of TJ Watt, Nick Herberg, and Alex Highsmith. On the defensive line, we have Hayward and Benton being our main 2 guys. And we also have a rookie, whether it's a top guy like a Grant or Nolan or Collins, or someone like Howard Cross in the 3rd or 4th. Our inside linebackers are Queen and Wilson again, and our corners are JPJ, our new addition vet, whether it's Reed, Ward, or Davis, and a rookie that we bring in. And then at safety, we have Elliott and Bynum. Is this team going to win a Super Bowl? No. Will they win a first-round playoff game? I think it's a better chance than the team we had last year. It'll obviously depend on who we play. I still think we'd have trouble playing the Ravens or the Chiefs or the Bills, but I do think this team will be much more competitive, and hopefully along with the coaching changes that could happen, the whole offense looks different, the defense is more creative, and the Steelers go back to being a relevant football team.